Good afternoon. My name's Loren Gresham, and I'm the president of Southern Nazarene University, and we're very pleased to be partnering today with Oklahoma Ethics Consortium. We've done things with Shannon and her leadership team before, and this, I think, is probably the largest effort that we've done together. And thank you so much, Shannon, and all the folk that are part of this great group. Now for today, it was entirely appropriate to have Jerome Washington bring our thought for the day on trust. Jerome's a graduate of Southern Nazarene University. He didn't mention that, Jerome, but it's always good to see you. Michael Hingson is an amazing person. If you've read anything about him in the publicity that's gone out, you perhaps know something about him. And I would say that on the back of your agenda today, there's way more than I have time to tell you. Let me just briefly say that Michael was born blind. He overcame all of the discouragement that came from some teachers and peers to go through a normal school calendar, really specializing a lot in mathematics. Took a master's degree in physics from one of the outstanding California system schools, University of California at Irvine. And he's been active in business for all these years. And he'll tell you enough that you'll see that he has been a very accomplished business person in a number of different ways. He really sprang to the national spotlight after 9/11. And I'm not going to jump in and do details of that. He will tell you what he feels you need to know. But he is a person of unusual gifts and grit and determination. And it's just a real privilege to have him here to address us today. So I present to you Mr. Michael Hingson.
We can sneak around here.
He's a team. He also has Africa with him. So, Michael and Africa.
Thank you, Dr. Gresham. Good to be here. It's a pleasure to be able to come and be with all of you today. Can you all hear me in the back? I was told to ask that. Can you all see me in the back? I don't see you, so... By the way, when a blind lecturer asks you a question, an important thing to know, don't raise your hands. Just thought I would mention that. It has come up in the past. In any case, it really is an honor to be here. I always believe that I get to learn as much from speaking and from the people who arrange speaking events for me as I hope that audiences get to hear from me. And Shannon has been very diligent in teaching me a variety of things here over the past couple of months. This was originally supposed to happen, as many of you know, at the beginning of February. Then some weather things or some strange thing called snow. We don't know that out in California a lot, but anyway, we had some snow and everything got postponed, and here we are today. But Shannon has been very diligent in making sure that I adhere to certain principles that are part of OK Ethics, and they're called the 5 Ps. Everybody know the 5 Ps? No profanity, no put-downs, no politics, no proselytizing, and no self-promotion. Wait. Profanity, proselytizing, politics, put-down, self-promotion. Isn't that 4 Ps and an S? I know, she really said no promoting self, but in any case, I just want to make sure that you all know those, because darn, that doesn't leave me anything else to say. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. So this is a really fascinating topic, the whole concept of ethics. When I was born a sighted individual back in February of 1950. But I was given a pure oxygen environment as a child, and although medical science was beginning to understand that that might not be totally wise, my doctors had not understood the challenge and the problem of giving a pure oxygen environment to a child. And so as a result, bottom line is that having been given pure oxygen for several days, my retinas did not develop properly and I became blind. Due to a condition we now know as retrolentofibromalacia, at least we've known it for a while, and then somebody decided to change the name to retinopathy of prematurity, and I still haven't been given a good explanation of why we changed the names, other than that's what we do in society, is we change the words. So retinopathy of prematurity or retrolentofibromalacia, the bottom line is I went blind. But the problem is that that wasn't known for a while. In fact, it wasn't discovered that I was blind until I was 4 months old. Then my aunt discovered it and in fact told my parents about it. My parents had gone to California to visit relatives and left me with an aunt who one day discovered that I wasn't reacting to bright sunlight. When my parents discovered that my aunt felt that I had become blind, they took me to an ophthalmologist, to all the learned eye doctors of the day in Chicago, Illinois, and in fact it was diagnosed that I was blind. Immediately the doctors said, put him in a home, send him away, he will not be any value to you and your family, he will only cause you grief, he cannot do anything, blind people cannot function in society, you need to send him away. I could not be a contributor to society. My parents rejected the doctors. My father had an 8th grade education, self-taught beyond that. My mother had a high school degree and a beautician's license. And these two people rejected the best advice from the learned experts of the day and said, we're going to take him home, he is going to grow up and be like any other person, he can do whatever he chooses to be, blindness isn't the problem. They didn't know enough perhaps to say, nor wanted to take the fight, to say blindness isn't the problem, it is the attitudes of society that make it so that blind people think they can't do things and that people think blind people can't do things, and as a result we're not productive. But they did say he can do whatever he wants, and so I was raised believing that in fact blindness was not the problem that I faced, but rather the misconceptions and the poor attitudes that people have about being blind. The fact of the matter is, I believe that every individual on this earth is born with gifts. God gave each of us gifts, many different than others, some invisible for a while, but how dare any of us have the indecency to say whose gifts are more valuable than any others? Who has the right to say what might be a contribution from one person and that person is lower on the totem pole than anyone else? The fact of the matter is that everyone can make contributions. I think that that works as long as we all adhere to a basic realm and concept of ethics. I was asked on an airplane coming here what I thought the difference between ethics and morality was. And I said that I didn't think that there was really a difference. Ethics is a code of conduct. Morality is really a code of conduct and a conduct that we need to have. I think that we all really grow up understanding the difference between right and wrong and what is ethical or appropriate and what is not. We choose to deviate from that. And one of the greatest gifts that all of us have is the ability to choose, the ability of free will to decide what we're going to do with ourselves. Now, the other aspect of that is, of course, there are ramifications to choices that we make. The reality is that we may have free will, but if we choose to fly airplanes into buildings like the World Trade Center, killing a number of people, there will be ramifications to that. Because that goes against the basic philosophical stream of society. And I don't care what religion it happens to be, whether it's Islamic, Christianity, or whatever, that is a violation of the basic precepts of humanity and the laws that God has set forth for us to live by. The fact of the matter is, being blind, I didn't even think about it for the longest time. I didn't think about I'm different than everyone else. My parents basically brought me up to believe that as a blind person, I might do things differently, but so what? Who cares? As long as you get the job done. So I didn't even think about the fact that although I didn't have textbooks for a while, when I was in school, I couldn't function because I did function. I did homework with my parents. I got Braille books when I went into the 4th grade. I learned Braille and learned how to read like anyone else. I live in a society today, however, that says, oh, blind people don't need Braille. Blind people don't need Braille because we have technology. You can listen to computers talk to you. You can listen to books on recorded media. You can get books electronically and they will be verbalized for you. So why do blind people have to read Braille? A fair question until you put it to the ethical standard of what do we do with society as a whole? Why do we teach sighted children to read print? They've got television, they got pictures. And television, of course, gives us everything that we need, right? Any TV reporters in the room? Am I going to get shot? The fact of the matter is we teach sighted children to read print because we know as a society that print is important. A written and reading language is necessary for us to thrive and to progress and to move on. Why is it different for blind people? It's only different because people think that blind people and other people with disabilities, for that matter, still do not function up to the same standard as the rest of us. But blindness isn't the problem. It is our perception of blindness. In this country today, we still have laws that allow organizations to apply for exemptions from paying persons with disabilities minimum wage. There are people in this country earning 3 cents an hour, and it's legal. Is that ethically right by any real standard? But the law was passed with the perception that disability meant lack of full equality and ability to function in society. It's time that that changes. We are all part of the same humanity. We are all part of the same world, and we need to recognize that we don't talk about diverse society, we should talk about an inclusive society. Diversity very rarely includes disability. I went and visited a few years ago when the 2 candidates were running for president, Obama and Romney. I went to their campaign websites, and they talked about being diverse. They talked about embracing diversity, supporting a diverse environment. They supported LGBT, they supported racial equality, they supported gender equality, and they didn't mention disabilities. So I'm speaking from a standpoint of saying we as a country and as a society overall have a growth area still to deal with, and to learn that in fact we all are part of the same humanity and that we all can create and make contributions. And that's the ethical thing to do. When I was a freshman in high school, I was removed from riding the school bus because I used a guide dog. The school superintendent in our district said, oh, blind people can ride the bus, no problem, but you got a guide dog. We have a rule that says no live animals are allowed on the school bus. Notwithstanding the fact that there was a penal code state law that said that I could take my dog on any public conveyance or common carrier, which included school buses. When I was called into the vice principal's office and told that I would no longer be able to ride the bus, I was also told, but we'll hire somebody else to bring you to school. Now, I don't know about you, but in my logical mind, that meant that that other vehicle and that person who would be driving me was a school bus and a school bus driver, even if it was a car. Under the law, I was still on a school bus, but the whole point was separate and not equal. My father hit the roof. He called for the school board to meet and to discuss it, and the school board accepted his concern, and a meeting was scheduled. My father went to the library and studied everything he could about the law, the guide dog laws known as the model or the white cane law in California and most states. And when the time came for the board meeting, he felt he was prepared. We went to the board meeting, my mother, my father, and I. We sat patiently through some other areas of business, and then it came time for our hearing. The superintendent was first to speak and got up and said, it's real simple. We have a rule, no live animals allowed on the bus. Guide dog's a live animal, can't ride on the bus. Now, we kind of had an ally in the room, the chair of the school board, who was a lawyer named George Cartosian, because Mr. Cartosian had just presided over my Star Boy Scout Court of Honor. I should say that I have been a member of the Boy Scouts for a long time. I am an Eagle Scout and vigil in the Order of the Arrow, so I know something about scouting and Court of Honors, and they're a big deal. It's a really great ceremony, and Mr. Cartosian presided over one involving me, so he knew who we were. We knew about him. He had a great reputation around the community. Anyway, Mr. Cartosian said, Mr. Hingson, do you want to speak on this? And my dad said he did. He said, you know, the superintendent's absolutely right. This is real simple. There's a state law. This is section 643.5 of the Penal Code of the State of California that says that blind persons can be accompanied by guide dogs wherever they choose to go, including all public transportation, public conveyances, common carriers. They can go into any hotel, restaurant, place of lodging, place of business. Guide dogs users cannot be denied access with their guide dogs. And so what the school board really needs to decide tonight, if you're going to keep my son off the bus, is which one of you is going to spend a year in the penitentiary? The superintendent stood up and very arrogantly said to Mr. Cartosian, is he right? I remember the tone. Mr. Cartosian just said, and I remember it well, yep. Nevertheless, the board voted 3-2 to support the superintendent. My father immediately went home and wrote the governor of the state of California. This was a man who had no fear and who had no compunction about fighting for what was right. He outlined the case, the whole case. We don't know what happened. We did hear that the superintendent was summoned to Sacramento. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall. I only say that based on the evidence, which was the next week I was back on the school bus. I learned two things from that. One, I was going to be treated different because I was blind. And I had to decide how to handle that. And two, the reality is we live in a society of principles, and we do have the right to hold people accountable. And it meant, in this case, you could fight City Hall and win. And that set a pattern for my life, because I know that, especially as I went through life, I have learned more and more how people have misconceptions about what blind people can and can't do. And other people. I mean, we're always hearing about what one person can do or cannot do, or what one group can do or cannot do. We've seen it with race, we've seen it with gender, we've seen it with so many things. But the reality is that when we hold all of us accountable to the same rules, and we recognize that that's the appropriate thing to do, we can be a whole lot more successful than we ever thought we could. And when we stray from that, there are those who will help to bring us back. But the fact of the matter is, we need to work together to make it a more inclusive world in which we all live. And that is why, as I mentioned the minimum wage issue earlier, there are proposed laws to change that and require that no organization can treat persons with disabilities different than any other individual, and that the sub-minimum wage exemptions are to be eliminated. It's in the Congress today, and hopefully it will pass. And if any of you have the opportunity, contact your Congress people and tell them to vote for H.R. 831. There is no room for paying anyone less than the minimum wage. I'm not going to get into a discussion about what the minimum wage ought to be, but I do know that I ought to have the same absolute right to earn it as anyone else, and there are no exceptions to that. So why should it be different? I know that my wife and I have been oftentimes treated significantly differently simply because of our differences. I should tell you that my wife is a person with a disability. She uses a wheelchair. She's been in a chair her whole life. When we got married, it worked out really well. She reads, I push, worked out well. In fact, I grew up, of course, in the 60s, and you know, out in California, I grew up in Palmdale, California, so we lived out there. We didn't live in San Francisco, the world of love and all that sort of stuff. Never did get any of that stuff. Darn, oh well, whatever. But anyway, so, but people would always ask me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And, you know, I love to have fun with that sort of thing. So when people would say, what do you want to be? I'd say, hey, you know, when I grow up, I want to be a pusher, man. You know, all these drugs and all that, I want to be a pusher. Well, I married her, and I'm a pusher, and it's legal. Even the sheriff over here can't arrest me for being a pusher, because it's legal. Actually, now I'm an athlete. I got to run. She's in a power chair, so I got to stay out of her way. It can be dangerous around our house. But I haven't broken a toe yet, and I'm very blessed about that. Now, it's... but the fact of the matter is, the reason I told you all that is that we went into a restaurant once about 15 years ago, and we went up to the hostess counter. We were standing there, and there was this young woman behind the counter. She wasn't saying anything. Karen and I were just standing there, and finally Karen kind of turns her head and looks at me, and she goes, this woman doesn't know what to do with us. And I went, oh. So I just spoke up and I said, so do you want to seat us? And she said, oh, well, yeah, I guess so. The problem is, you know, my wife's in a wheelchair, so she's seated way down, and so she has to look up, or they have to look down to see her, and I don't make eye contact, so this poor woman didn't know what to do with us. Well, we got it all worked out, and we had breakfast, and it was fine. But I think that all of us who tend to be different also need to have our own level of understanding. And it is so easy to get bitter and angry about it, and it is so easy to be frustrated, and it does happen. But bottom line is, I know that for me, ultimately what I have to do is to try to do all I can to teach people that it's okay to be blind, and it's okay to be around blind people, and we're not going to do anything to cause any extra grief in the world, and that we can be just as helpful, as productive, and as valued in society as anyone else, and that we should be. So I went to college. I got a college degree. I got a master's degree along the way also in physics from the University of California at Irvine, as Dr. Gresham said. I grew up doing the same things as other kids, and so as a result I got to college thinking that I was probably reasonably normal like anyone else. I mean, when I was 7 years old, I rode a bicycle around our neighborhood just like any other kid. Drove the neighbors crazy when I rode a bike around the street. Just because you guys can't do it, it's not that funny. Hey, I can ride with my eyes closed too. The fact of the matter is you learn to listen. You learn to hear what's going on around you. When I say that and then somebody will come up and ask me a question, I'll say, what? No, not really. But the fact of the matter is that you learn to listen. You learn how to tell your surroundings. That's very doable. So I rode a bike. I came into our house once and neighbors were calling my dad complaining about his kid riding a bike. And my dad kept saying, well, so what? Well, we're not talking about the older kid, we're talking about the younger one, the blind one. And my dad said, well, what's the problem? Well, he's blind, he can't ride a bike. Well, wasn't he out there riding a bike? Well, yeah. Did he have any problems? Well, no. Did he hit anything? No. Is he hurt in any way? No. Well, then what's the problem? They hung up. Because people can't accept different. You know, it's, by the way, it's just as true with religion. So we all need to be more open to accepting things that may not just be exactly as we expect them to be. That is also part of what makes us an ethical society, is the concept of tolerance. Would that we all adhered more to that. But I went to college, as I said, and survived pretty well, although I discovered a letter in my file once that one of the graduate professors had written saying that no blind person could ever possibly absorb the material necessary to get an advanced degree in physics. Now, I don't know what eyesight has to do with mental capacity to absorb, but that's what this individual said. I think the chair of the department was too embarrassed to share it with me, but we got to see it. And I didn't care. I don't think I ever took any of that guy's classes, and neither would I want to, you know, but whatever. But I went through college and went into the workforce and survived. I had not expected to go into sales, but I ended up being in a sales environment and did that for many years. Along the way, I moved to Boston to work for a company. Long way from California to Boston, but I did it. And then that company, after a while, was purchased by Xerox and actually asked me to go back to California to help with the transition at the California end for the company into the Xerox family. The thanks for that was that after the company was totally acquired, all of the salespeople in the company were told to go away because Xerox people wanted to bring in their own people. I was the last to go, but nevertheless was made to go away simply because they wanted to bring in Xerox people. I always question that kind of a philosophy when you're dealing with the vision of a company and how quickly to destroy the vision. But nevertheless, that's what Xerox did, and I had to go find a job and couldn't find one. I started my own company selling computer-aided design systems to architects in order to make a living. And it worked for a while, but it just wasn't doing as well as we wanted because we were selling hardware and software systems, and it was too hard to make money on computer hardware selling PCs because everybody in the world was selling PCs by the late 1980s. So I went back into the workforce, worked for a company that hired me because I demonstrated value in a very obtuse way, and I think it's fair to share it with you. In March of 1989, I was looking with my wife at newspapers, and we saw this ad for a company that wanted to hire somebody to sell certain kinds of new innovative disk drive products and other computer technologies. It's always been a battle if you're blind. Do you say in your resume or in your cover letter that you're blind? If you do, you'll probably not be invited for an interview. If you don't, you may be invited, but when you're there in front of people and they discover you're blind, there will probably be a lot of animosity and resentment because you didn't tell them in advance that you were blind, so they didn't know how to deal with you, and so it's just not comfortable. And when I talked to my wife about that before applying for this job, she, as wives tend to do, said, "You're an idiot. You took a Dale Carnegie sales course 10 years before and you kept talking about turning liabilities into assets." And then this little light bulb in my head went off. You know, I always hear about these little light bulbs that go off in cartoons. I'm telling you, it's real. So this little light bulb went off and I wrote a letter. Here's the last paragraph of the letter that I wrote to this company. The most important thing that you can consider when you're looking to hire me or consider hiring me for this job is that I happen to be blind. Because as a blind person, I've had to sell all my life just to function. I've had to sell to convince people to let me rent or buy a house. I've had to sell sometimes to fly on airplanes or go into grocery stores and take my guide dog with me. So when you're hiring someone for this job, do you want to employ just a person who sells during the day and goes home and that's it? Or do you want to hire somebody who truly understands sales for the science and art that it is and who sells all their life because it's a total life skill? I got the interview and I was told when they hired me that I got the job because of that attitude and philosophy. The fact of the matter is, I don't believe that we look at difference for the sake of difference. I believe that we look at difference for the sake of what does it bring and how can it add value to whatever we're doing. So in other words, I look not for difference but inclusion. How do we include the maximum value in whatever we're doing? And whenever I hired people as a salesperson, as a sales manager working at that company and others since, I always looked for how to add the maximum value. even if it meant hiring a rookie who I believed would do a better job of selling than much more experienced people. But my best salespeople always had a unique philosophy about selling. I talked this morning about Kevin, my best sales guy who I ever hired. I asked Kevin when he came in for the interview, what are you going to be selling for us? And Kevin said, unlike most salespeople who would just say, well, your products and all that, and then they'd go on to say whether or not they had researched the products before they came, but Kevin said, the only thing I have to sell is myself and my word. Nothing else matters. Everything else is secondary. And that's my philosophy, and that's how I always answered the question. And I was very impressed with Kevin. There were reasons why he was successful, because he was ethical and honest with customers and wouldn't sell a product if it wouldn't meet the need. Kevin and I still remain in touch to this day, and he's continuing to be very successful in sales. I too think I am still in sales, although today I'm not selling computers, but other things like attitudes and philosophy and inspiration. But that came about with a twist of fate, of course, as well, as we all know. Kevin worked for me when I opened an office in the World Trade Center on the 78th floor of Tower 1. 78 floors is pretty high. Do y'all have a conception of 78 floors? 78 floors is so high that, come on, anybody watch Johnny Carson years ago? Let's try it once more. 78 floors is so high that, geez, not much enthusiasm. Once more. 78 floors is so high that, on the 4th of July, people would come to our office to look down on the fireworks displays in New York. It's so high that the cell phones didn't work up there, too far above the cell towers. See, now you guys, that's a lesson. That's what they used to do on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, for those who don't know Johnny Carson. So we opened our office and worked there, created a great sales team, created a lot of trust with customers, because we were absolutely, in my office, of a mindset that we had to be open to trust, and we had to earn the trust of the people that we were selling to. On the 11th of September, I was going to try to impart some of that to resellers who worked with us to sell products, who would buy our products and resell them. We had set up several seminars that day. And in fact, the first one was supposed to start at 9 o'clock. That morning, I was supposed to wake up at 5 and go into the World Trade Center, but lo and behold, a thunderstorm came along. Now, by that time, I had gotten my 5th guide dog, Roselle. Roselle was a yellow lab. I got her in November of 1999. And so by the time we had been together and 9/11 happened, we had been working with each other for 22 months. She was 42 months old. She was 3.5 years old. And we had been working together for 22 months. So we had a good relationship. I believe that it takes a good year to develop a trusting relationship with a guide dog. Dogs are open to trust much more than people are. You know, people always are concerned, if I trust this guy, what's going to happen? Or this woman, what's going to happen? You know, I don't know whether I can really trust them. They're going to be looking at it from what's in it for them, rather than just saying, I'm open to exploring trust. Now, I'm not saying that we arbitrarily should trust, but I'm saying that we need to be more open to the idea of trust. We need to be open to the possibility that other people can trust us and that we can trust other people. Dogs do love unconditionally, but they do not trust unconditionally. And it takes a year to develop the total, sometimes I think incomprehensible trust that means that we can work together seamlessly. A guide dog's job in guiding a blind person is not to know where I want to go nor how to get there. That's my job. And to describe how to do that, would take as long as it would be for you to describe to me how you grew up and learned how to do the things that you do. It is just as natural. The difference between blindness and sight is that too many people become blind later in life, and so they have to relearn skills later than they otherwise would have had to do. And the problem is we don't have enough people with a positive attitude about blindness and what it means to be blind. I want to also define blindness for you. Blindness doesn't mean a total lack of eyesight. A person is blind under the definition I choose to use when their eyesight diminishes to the point where they cannot use their eyesight to function in the way they would normally function as a fully sighted person. There are lots of blind people who still have eyesight, but they don't have enough eyesight to not use technology or products or alternative techniques to be able to function. All too often, those people are not taught the skills of being a blind person. Rather, they're told, oh, you can still use a magnifier and read print. Yeah, notwithstanding the fact that you can do that at 10 words a minute. You can still use your eyesight to get around. Here's a cane, you might want to start using it, but you can still use your eyesight, rather than learning the use of a cane and learning that it's okay to use it. It's okay to be blind. It is not the end of the world. It means traveling down the same road, maybe in a different lane, but still traveling the same road. And that you can go back and do the same things you were doing. You can travel the world. You can do whatever you want to do. Blindness shouldn't be the roadblock if you learn the skills. And I could tell you, again, stories, and we just don't have the time. Shannon's a strict taskmistress. So, in any case, on the 11th of September, we had a thunderstorm. Roselle was afraid of thunderstorms, and as a result, we ended up spending an hour and a half in my office at 12:30 in the morning before we got a chance to go back to sleep, and now only sleep for 3 more hours and then I go up to get into the training process for the seminar. I made it into New York City about 7:40 that morning and met somebody at our door who was bringing breakfast that we had ordered for all of the people who would be coming in. We went in and set up. A few minutes later, David Frank, a colleague from our corporate office in Irvine, arrived with some early guests, early arrivals who got the first shot at breakfast. David was there not because he was going to be conducting the seminar, but because he had account responsibility for the people who were coming in that day. He worked with them through a distribution channel. My job was to be their support person and to teach today so that they would understand and know how to come to me and work with me. David's job was to talk about the numbers and the pricing. David and I were in my office finishing final preparations for the seminars. At 8:45, I was actually reaching for a piece of stationery to print a final list of all the attendees. That was for the Port Authority security people who needed to know who was coming so that they could just issue badges rather than calling up every time someone arrived. I was reaching for stationery when suddenly we heard a muffled explosion. The building kind of shivered, and then if you imagine my arm as the World Trade Center tower, the building began to tip. It just started tipping and tipping and tipping. It kept moving in one direction, tipping to the south, kind of southwest. Just kept tipping and tipping. David and I started saying, what's going on? David said, you think it's an earthquake? And I said, no, I don't think so, because it wasn't moving to the side or shaking around. It was going in one direction. I said, do you think it's an explosion? He said, it didn't sound like it. I don't know what it is. Nevertheless, I grew up in Palmdale, California, so what I did is I moved over to the doorway, and I stood in the doorway. Yeah, 78 floors up, standing in a doorway is really going to help a lot, right? But I stood in the doorway anyway and waited to see what was going to happen. Come here. David was holding on to my desk. Roselle was asleep under my desk as the building continued to tip. Finally, David and I said goodbye to each other because we thought we were about to take a 78-floor plunge to the street. We stood there. I didn't realize I was holding my breath, but the building started slowing and it stopped, and then it started moving back the other way. And I remember letting out my breath with a sigh of relief. The building finally became vertical, and as soon as it did, I went back into the office from the doorway, and I met Roselle, my guide dog, coming out from under my desk. I took her leash and I told her to heel, which meant to come around on my left-hand side and to sit like what she's doing now. And about that time, the building dropped straight down about 6 feet. What we know today is that buildings like the World Trade Center are constructed with expansion joints because, in fact, they will be buffeted by heavy windstorms, or like happened in the mid-1940s, the Empire State Building was struck by an airplane that went off course. And so as to not have the building break, they're flexible. And so as a result, what happened to us on 9/11 is that the building bent, and then it came back. I met Roselle. I told her to come out from under, well, she came out from under my desk. I told her to heel. She came around and sat on my left side like she's doing now, and about that time the building dropped straight down about 6 feet. When it tipped, we had moved about 20 feet. But now it had dropped, and as we learned later, what was really happening is that because the building was flexible, the expansion joints had opened, and when the building straightened up again, the expansion joints went back to their normal configuration and the building dropped. Sounds natural and reasonable, but who knew at the time? As soon as the building stopped moving, my friend David turned around and looked out the window and started shouting, "Oh my God, Mike, there's fire and smoke above us. There are millions of pieces of burning paper falling outside the windows. We got to get out of here right now. We can't stay here." And I said, "Slow down, David. No, we got to get out of here right now. We can't stay here. There are millions of pieces of burning paper falling outside the window." I said, "Slow down." Our guests began to scream. They started moving toward our exit, the exit from the conference room, and out toward the exit to our office. I kept saying, "Slow down, David." And David said, "No, we got to get out of here right now." And I said, "No, slow down." Finally, he used the big line, "You can't see it. You don't understand." Now, I could hear debris falling outside the window. I believe David saw fire and smoke. I believe that there was burning debris falling outside the window because David saw it. I didn't smell smoke. I didn't need to. I had his reactions. But the problem is that David wasn't observing something that I was. Namely, what I had going on that he didn't see was next to me was seated a dog, just wagging her tail and not paying any attention to anything going on around her other than to say, "What woke me up?" You've all read stories about animals that got people out of buildings because they sensed something before the people did, and they got them out, and that's what happened to us. So as a result, I was watching Roselle as much as anything else. I knew what it was like when she was afraid. She wasn't illustrating fear to me at all. So the bottom line is, I finally got David to focus, and I said, "Get our guests to the stairs. Don't let them take elevators, because since there's fire, it could get into the elevator shafts," which it did. "And we don't want any of our people hurt. Get them to the stairs and start them down, then come back and we'll leave." And that's what happened. I called my wife while David was getting them to the stairs to tell her that there had been an explosion or something and that we were going to be leaving the complex, and I called her as soon as I could. I hung up the phone. David came back. We swept the offices. No one else there. We went to the stairs and we started down. Almost immediately, I began smelling an odor. Turns out, as I was smelling it, it was familiar. I couldn't place it, but it was familiar. Finally, I realized I'm smelling the fumes from burning jet fuel. I knew that odor very well because of the fact that I did a lot of traveling for my company, and in reality, I've been to a lot of airports. So finally, what happened was that I said to people around me, "I'm smelling burning jet fuel." And other people said, "Yeah, we were trying to figure it out. We couldn't figure out what it was. You're right. It's got to be that we were hit by an airplane." But we didn't know. We had no clue what had actually happened. So all we could do was assume that for some reason an airplane had struck the tower and that we were going down to get out of there. We went down about 10 floors, and then we heard from above us a voice that said, "Burn victim coming through. Move to the side of the stairs. Let people by." And we did. What happened was that a group of people who were helping a woman go down the stairs passed us, surrounding her. She was very badly burned over the upper part of her body. A lot of clothing had burned away. She was, as David said, in shock, but we just watched her go down the stairs and out of sight. Then we continued to go down. David and I continued to walk down the stairs together. Then we heard burn victim coming through again. Move to the side. We did. Another woman, very badly burned, passed us on the stairs. And after that, we realized how bad it must be above us. What happened was, soon after the second person passed us, a woman near us on the stairs suddenly stopped and said, I can't breathe. I can't go on. We're not going to be able to make it out of here. I can't breathe. About 8 or 9 of us stopped and surrounded her on the stairs and literally just had a group hug right there on the stairs. Roselle gave her kisses, as Roselle is prone to do. I hugged her and said, come on, you can do it. You can keep going. And other people said the same thing, and she was able to keep going. Teamwork, working together, adding value. We continued down the stairs. As we traveled down, I know a lot of people were very worried. Finally, even David said, Mike, we're going to die. We're not going to make it out of here. I can't do this. And I just said, stop it, David. If Roselle and I can go down these stairs, so can you. I snapped at him very deliberately. I needed to bring him back. He told me that that brought him out of his funk. And what he then decided to do, as he explained it to me, was he wanted to travel a floor below me on the stairs and shout up to me what he was seeing. He thought that'd be helpful. And he said, also, that's a way that I can take my mind off of what's going on. I said, okay. So he went down, started talking. Hey, I'm on the 48th floor. Everything is okay here. We're going to keep going on down, going down to 47. And of course, I was a floor above him, telling Roselle, forward, good girl, keep going. What a good girl. Downstairs, get to the bottom, left turn, 180 degrees, forward, down some more stairs. I'm at the 48th floor. David, 47th floor, everything is good here, going on down. Good girl, Roselle, left, forward. And then I started thinking to myself, how many stairs are we going to go down? Hey, it's Trivial Pursuit. You know, I like those. I like trivia. So I was thinking about that, and finally I decided, I know how I can basically do this. I learned how to estimate in physics. So I started counting. We got to the 47th floor. I normally don't count stairs. It doesn't serve a useful purpose. That's what the dog is for, or a cane, you know. It's trust. So I got to the 47th floor. David's 46th. I said, Roselle, left, forward. And I started counting. Down 10 stairs. Left, good girl, Roselle. Forward, down 9 stairs. Meanwhile, as I learned later, people were watching us go down the stairs. They were observing us. They were seeing that we went down the stairs successfully and well. And as some of them told me later, we saw you going and we thought, if you could go down the stairs, so could we. No need to panic. And they followed us. So I knew we were helping other people. David's shouting where he was and what he was seeing turned out to be, I think, extremely important. I think it's one of the most remarkable things that I saw on 9/11. Because David was, although doing it for me, David was in fact helping hundreds, thousands of other people who heard him, above him and below him. Hey, I'm at the 45th floor, everything is good. David was giving people a beacon. He was giving people something to focus on. And that was important. Finally, David's at the 44th floor. Hey, this is the entrance to the Port Authority cafeteria. Not stopping, going on down the stairs. We were at 45, we're going on down. We get to 44, David's at 43. I realized we're going down 10 steps, 180-degree turn, down 9 steps, we're at the next floor. So that's 19 stairs between floors. Well, we're going to go down from the 78th floor to the first floor. That's 77 flights, or 77 floors. 77 times 19 equals... No calculators. All right, 1,463 stairs. David got to the 30th floor finally. Along the way, I had been worried about whether we'd lose power and lighting. In fact, even said to people at one point, don't anyone worry if the power and lights go out. Roselle and I are here. I'm blind. Roselle's my guide dog, but we're offering a half-price special to get you out today only. I did want people to know there was a blind person who, if we had power loss, would get them out. That was why I did it. David got to the 30th floor, told us that firefighters were there. They were coming up the stairs as he arrived. I went down to where he was. They hadn't quite got to us. He said they're dressed in their heavy protective clothing and they got maybe 100 pounds of equipment on their backs. It was actually like about 50 or 60, but still a lot. We learned later it took them a minute to go from one floor to the next. It took us 20 seconds to go down from one floor to the next. The first guy gets to us and he stops right in front of me. He goes, "Hey, buddy, you okay?" And I go, "Yeah, I'm fine." He's shouting. You know, the people always shout at blind people. You can't hear. So I just said, "Yeah, I'm good." "Well, that's really nice. We're going to send somebody down the stairs with you to make sure you get out." You know how they talk back there, "with you?" It's a contraction. I said, "Look, we're really okay." And he said, "No, we're going to send somebody down. We want to make sure you get out okay." And I just said, "Look, we're okay." Finally, I said, "Look, I got my guide dog here. Roselle and I are working together. We're fine." There was a reason I was resisting him, which I'll explain. But he said, "Well, that's very nice, but we're going to send somebody with you anyway." He starts petting Roselle. It wasn't the time to give him a lecture. Don't pet a working guide dog. And I'll tell you now, you see guide dog harness, do not touch, do not interact with, do not talk to, don't do anything to acknowledge a dog in harness. You're distracting the dog. The dog's got a job to do. That dog could be on the floor and you might think the dog is asleep, but when it's in harness, it's conditioned to do a job. And it will jump up and do that job at the least possible encouragement from its person. Don't touch or interact with a guide dog in harness. I will take Africa's harness off at the end of what's occurring today, and you can visit with her. You'll see, big difference. But harness on, leave alone, and don't even talk to. So it wasn't the time to give him a lecture about don't pet a working guide dog. He's petting her, she's giving him kisses. It also wasn't the time to give him a lecture about blindness isn't the problem, it's your attitude, sir. So I just said, "Look, I got my friend David over here who can see, we're working together, we're okay." And he turns to David, "You're with him?" David goes, "Yeah, he's okay, don't worry about him." He says, "Okay." So he gives Roselle a few more pets, she gives him a few more kisses, and he goes up the stairs probably having received the last unconditional love he ever got in his life. Why did I resist? I resisted because he is part of a team. There were 50 firefighters that we saw go up the stairs that day. They're part of a team. They're trained to work in a certain way. Yes, they could have spared somebody to help me down the stairs, but I didn't need it. Going downstairs isn't magic. And the reality of the situation is that I would be taking somebody away from their normal team responsibilities. I didn't want to, not knowing what was happening, I didn't want to see on the news later how some firefighter helped a blind person out of the building, and so because of that they were out of position and somebody else got hurt. The firefighters are a team, and I will not be responsible for breaking up a team. They're also the heroes that everyone says they are. And I will not ever ask people to have a moment of silence and mourn their passing. They went up the stairs, men and women, selflessly to do a job. And they did it. Would you all help me, please, to celebrate their lives? Just give a round of applause for the heroes we lost on 9/11. David reassumed his scout position, and 4 floors later somebody started passing up water bottles. It was getting pretty hot on the stairs. And David brought a bottle up to us. We gave Roselle some water. We had water, and then we continued on down. He got to the first floor and said, "The water sprinklers are on. You're going to have to run through a curtain of water to get out." And then he was gone. I got down to the first floor, told Roselle forward, hop up to speed up, and we rushed through this curtain of water and found ourselves in the lobby of One World Trade Center. Normally a quiet office building lobby, but now there was this chaotic scene. People were shouting, "Don't go outside, go this way. No, 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 don't go over there, come this way." And this guy comes up to us. He introduces himself as being with the FBI. And I was wondering, why is the FBI here? What is going on? And I asked him, what's going on? He said, no time. We're telling everyone to get out, and we're helping them. Just come with me. He raced us through the complex, and finally at 9:45 in the morning, an hour after the plane hit, we got outside. As soon as we got outside, we were told to leave the area, but before we did, David looked around and saw fire in Tower 2. We had no idea what had happened. We went over to Broadway and started walking north on Broadway. We got to Ann Street, which put us diagonally across from Tower 2. David said, I want to stop and take pictures of the fire. I can see it real clearly. I wanted to try to call my wife. I tried to call her and couldn't get through. The connections and circuits were busy, as we now know from people saying goodbye to loved ones up above where they couldn't escape. David was taking pictures. I finished trying to get to Karen. I put my phone away, and he was putting his camera away when a police officer yelled, "Get out of here, it's coming down now!" And suddenly we heard this rumble that became this deafening roar. I describe it as kind of a combination of a freight train and a waterfall. You could hear metal clattering and glass breaking, and then the white noise of the building just collapsing. Everyone turned and ran. I turned 180 degrees and ran back the way I had come. David had already ran. And I remember as I started to run thinking, God, I can't believe that you got us out of a building just to have it fall on us. As soon as I thought that, I heard in my head, as clearly as you hear me, a voice that said, don't worry about what you can't control. Focus on running with Roselle and the rest will take care of itself. As clearly as you hear me, I heard that voice. And then I had this sense of conviction that if we worked together, we'd all be okay. We just ran, got to Fulton Street, the next street, turned right on Fulton Street and ran, caught up to David. David had gone the same way as it turns out. He had realized that he had ran off and just left me and was going to come back and get me, but before he did that, I caught up with him and we continued to run. We got caught in the dust cloud, all the dirt and debris of the building collapsing. I could feel it going down my throat into my lungs. David said that he was so thick he couldn't see his hand 6 inches in front of his face, but we kept running, now trying to get out of that debris and that dust cloud by looking for an entrance to the building that was right on our right-hand side as we ran. I kept telling Roselle, right, right, and I don't know whether she could see my hand signals or even hear me, but suddenly I heard an opening to my right, and obviously she had heard me because she turned right, she took 1 step and stopped and wouldn't move. She wasn't acting afraid, but she wouldn't move. Focus on running with Roselle and the rest will take care of itself. I realized she must have stopped for a reason, and on investigating, I discovered that we were at the top of a flight of stairs. She had done her job perfectly. We went down the stairs into an area that turned out to be an entrance to the Fulton Street subway station. There was a woman at the bottom of the stairs who was crying and saying, help, I can't see, my eyes are full of dirt, I don't want to fall into the subway system. I came down next to her, I took her arm and I said, hey, don't worry. My name is Mike, I'm blind, but I've got my guide dog Roselle here, you're okay. Clear out your eyes. What's your name, by the way? And she introduced herself as Carol. Teamwork, how quickly it reasserted itself. And she started cleaning out her eyes, but then a guy comes up the stairs from further in the subway system. He introduced himself as Lou, an employee of the system, and offered to take us down to an employee locker room where there was a water fountain and so on. Carol said she could see well enough that she didn't need help down the stairs, and we all went down, found ourselves in this locker room and waited for about 15 minutes till a police officer came and said, need to leave the area now. We followed him upstairs, through the arcade, and upstairs to the outside. The air was a little better, but as David looked around suddenly, he said, oh my God, Mike, there's no Tower 2 anymore. I said, what do you see? And he said, all I see are pillars of smoke, hundreds of feet tall. We stood there in shock and then just turned and walked away, continuing west on Fulton Street. We walked for about 10 minutes, and then we found ourselves in a little plaza when suddenly we heard that freight train waterfall sound again, and we knew it must be our tower collapsing. We were further away. We didn't think we would be hit by any flying debris, but another dust cloud did come, so we moved to the side to avoid the dust cloud, hunkered down, waited for everything to pass by and stop. Then we stood up and David looked around. He then said, oh my God, Mike, there's no World Trade Center anymore. I said, what do you see? And he said, all I see are fingers of fire, hundreds of feet tall and pillars of smoke. It's gone. We had no clue. But then I tried to call my wife Karen, and this time I got through, and she's the one who told us what had happened. I made it back home the next day, or well, late that night, and the next day I called Guide Dogs for the Blind, because we had been visited by some of the people from the school. Guide Dogs for the Blind is where I've gotten all of my guide dogs out in California. They wanted to put out a news story, and they even said, bet you're going to be on TV. What show do you want to be on? And I sort of flippantly said, oh, Larry King Live. I was in shock. But 2 days later, on the 14th of September, we made the first of 5 appearances on Larry King Live. Our story went viral. Even before 9/11, we had wanted to move back to California, but then Guide Dogs for the Blind offered me a position as their public spokesperson. And so as a result, we moved back to California and did that for 6.5 years. Then the school decided they wanted to phase out the job, that nobody was interested in the story anymore. And so I went off and started my own company to do it, to tell the story, to continue speaking, which is what I do full time. Traveling and talking about teamwork and lessons of working together, ethics, of course, talking about trust, being open to trust, leadership, inclusion, and so on. And that's all because, of course, as Guide Dog said, nobody was really interested in the story, he said sarcastically. In 2010, I had an opportunity to write a book with a woman named Susie Flory, so we joined forces and wrote, and through her agent, who became my agent, Chip McGregor, we published Thunderdog, the story of a guide dog, a blind man, and the triumph of trust. Thunderdog was published by Thomas Nelson Publishing on August 2nd, 2011, and on the 10th, I was called by Thomas Nelson people who said, guess what? Thunderdog is on the New York Times bestseller list its first week out. Cool. In 2011, Roselle passed in late June, and later that year she was honored as the Hero Dog of the Year by the American Humane Association in its first annual contest. This past December, we published a second book called Running with Roselle, more for children, although more adults are buying it than kids, and it's available on our website. We do, as you heard, have Thunderdog here. He said not self-promoting. But actually, I do have to tell you that Africa asked me, and Africa, I didn't really introduce, Affie, come here. I didn't really introduce Africa to you, and I really should. You've seen her, but this is Africa. She is 7. Affie, come here, come up here, come on. There she is. This is Africa. And Africa is saying, please buy books, I need kibbles. Tell the people that I'm losing weight. Tell them there isn't much time. We really need their help. So come buy books. But I want to leave you with a thought. I want to leave you with comments made by Dr. Jacobus Tenbrook, the founder of the National Federation of the Blind, a constitutional law scholar. He was a scholar at the University of California at Berkeley, and in 1956 delivered the banquet speech at the 16th annual convention of the Federation in San Francisco, California, even close to home for him. The title of the speech was In the Grace of God, and the final paragraphs of the speech go like this. In the 16th century, John Bradford made a famous remark which has ever since been held up to us, we're talking about blind people, as a model of Christian humility and correct charity, and which you've seen in some of the comments that I've made this evening. Seeing a beggar in his rags creeping along a wall through a flash of lightning and a stormy night, Bradford said, "But for the grace of God, there go I." Compassion was shown, pity was shown, charity was shown, humility was shown. There was even an acknowledgement that the relative positions of the two might have been switched. Yet, despite the compassion, despite the pity, despite the humility, despite the charity, how insufferably arrogant, there was still an unbridgeable gulf between Bradford and the beggar. They were not one, but two. Whatever might have been, Bradford thought himself Bradford and the beggar a beggar. One high, the other low. One wise, the other misguided, one strong, the other weak, one virtuous, the other depraved. We do not and cannot take the Bradford approach. That's the problem with Braille. You can't put everything on one page. Although beggary is still the badge that is often too held up to us as our symbol of social attitudes, that is at least a part of it, however. But in a broader sense, we are that beggar, and he is each of us. We are made out of the same image and out of the same ingredients. We are people who all have the same weaknesses and strengths, the same feelings, emotions, and drives. And we are all the products of the same social, economic, and other environmental forces. How much more consonant with the facts of an individual and social life, how much more a part of a true humanity to say instead, there, within the grace of God, do go I. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much.